In an era of remasters and re-releases, it can be somewhat difficult to find games that are remastered in a way that really brings them into the current generation with all the features and comforts that we are used to in the present day. The Legend of Zelda franchise is no shy to HD remasters, as this is the third 3D Zelda game to have been remastered in high definition, following Twilight Princess HD and Wind Waker HD that came before it on the Wii U. Skyward Sword, being a Wii title, featured motion controls as the only way to play the game. And with its HD outing on the Switch, the game seeks to retain its motion control roots with Joy-Con support, and is also implementing non-motion controller support that can be played while in handheld mode or while docked. To be able to play Skyward Sword in its entirety without motion controls is something the Zelda community have been craving ever since its initial release on the Wii back in 2011. And it is exciting that gamers are finally given the opportunity to play the game with its new control scheme if they so choose. Although the ability to play the game with motion controls is definitely the most noticeable and desired change that fans are eager to check out, this HD remaster is full of excellent quality of life improvements that elevate this release above its previous remasters and is a truly excellent way to play one of the most divisive entries in the monolithic The Legend of Zelda franchise. For those who are unfamiliar with the story of Skyward Sword, or if you haven't played it in a while and want a brief touch-up, Skyward Sword represents the first entry in the series canonically. In this game, Link finds himself high above the clouds in a nice quaint village called Skyloft. Here we find Link with a young Zelda, urging Link to do his best to pass his final exam as a knight in training to protect Skyloft, its people, and the Hylian temple that rests on it. Drama ensues with rival classmate Groose, as Groose is jealous of Link's friendship with Zelda. Groose tries to sabotage Link's chance of participating in the exam to knighthood by sealing away Link's Loftwing, a creature that Knights of Skyloft ride on that travel the skies, protecting Skyloft. For the first hour or so, the player is tasked with exploring Skyloft, finding your Loftwing, and passing the final exam by defeating other trainees in a race through the sky. As Link celebrates with Zelda, danger befalls the two as they are both separated, with Zelda being cast into the clouds below by a sinister dark force. Link makes his way to the Hylian statue atop the highest peak in Skyloft and is able to resurrect a sword known as the Goddess Sword. The sword, sprung back to life, casts out Fi, a spirit who resided in the sword and serves as your companion as Link sets out on an adventure to try to recover Zelda and defeat the evil that threatens to take over Skyloft. With sword in hand, Link now has access to the lands beneath the clouds, lands that were viewed as myth for generations. Throughout the course of this adventure, Link uncovers the mysteries about the evil that lurks beneath the surface and ultimately about what makes Zelda so special. Skyward Sword HD follows a mostly traditional Zelda format pre-Breath of the Wild, where there is a more linear landmass that connects to dungeons. These dungeons then hold special gear that allow Link to traverse further areas of said dungeons and the world, allowing Link to explore further and further. Such items include the Beetle, a remote control device that players can glide through the sky, a claw shot that allows Link to swing from one grapple point to another, a vacuum that sucks up sand, debris, and more tools at his disposal. Instead of handing Link most of these tools at the beginning, like in Breath of the Wild, Link follows a mostly linear adventure that rewards him with tools that expand the gameplay in meaningful ways and also creates incentives for the player to revisit older areas to uncover more secrets and hidden items. The main objective is almost always clearly indicated, as this is a much more linear adventure than Breath of the Wild. Dungeons are themed to their respective areas. Boss battles often require players to use that dungeon's respective gear to progress. Skyward Sword introduces the stamina gauge for the first time in a 3D Zelda game, where players can use to sprint distances, climb ladders, vines, and scale ledges with bursts of speed by holding down the B button. Throughout the adventure, Link encounters numerous enemies that make use of the game's signature sword play that was linked solely to the motion controls, but can now be optionally played using button controls. Link must use his sword to slice vertically, horizontally, and diagonally, as well as thrusts and spins to hit many enemies' weak points. This is the main gameplay mechanic that makes it wildly different from all other Zelda games, as players must accurately use their sword to enact destruction on their enemies. I greatly enjoy the combat in this game for this reason, as it is very unique and at times challenging. Skyward Sword is the last traditional 3D Zelda game before Breath of the Wild, and this could be a good thing or a bad thing to many players who have played the universally acclaimed Breath of the Wild. Skyward Sword forgoes the massive open world, the weapon durability, cooking mechanics, and many more aspects of Breath of the Wild, and is instead a much more linear game with a deliberate focus. This game nudges the player along in the right direction without giving the player too much freedom to go about tackling the world. This is not to say that this game won't make you think, as the title has several cleverly thought out puzzles that are expertly woven into the fabric of the game. There are many side activities that reward players with gratitude crystals that the player can use to exchange with this frightening fellow in Skyloft to redeem many of the game's best rewards, including a heart piece, numerous wallet upgrades, and many more. Various minigames can be played to gain more rupees, items, and heart pieces like Link Darts. They really ought to make this an Olympic sport. Pumpkin balancing, and a boss rush mode accessible very late in the game. Players can choose to explore the numerous, albeit tiny islands that litter the clouds atop your Loftwing. But besides that, this is a decidedly linear game that can be a breath of fresh air to those that found the open world in Breath of the Wild to be a bit too overwhelming. It has to be said that the bosses in this game are some of the very best in the entire franchise, and this title takes the cake for me when it comes to the best 3D Zelda bosses. Most of them are very imaginative and require great use of your sword strikes, in addition to items that you have acquired throughout your travels. It must be said that this game has some padding issues in regards to unenjoyable filler content that seems completely unnecessary with reused and slightly altered boss fights and mob encounters. These don't take away too much from my total enjoyment of the game, but this is unnecessary kind of bloat that ends up making parts of this adventure a chore. Regardless, this is a phenomenal Zelda game, and anyone interested in buying this game should know that this title is packed with quality Zelda action that looks better than ever in its HD remaster on the Nintendo Switch. The first thing players will immediately notice is the buttery smooth 60 frames per second performance in both the game's gameplay and its cutscenes. Playing a 3D Zelda game at 60 FPS is incredible because not only does it look better with its smooth gameplay, but it is super responsive. I hope all future Zelda remakes or re-releases and even new games in the franchise will be playable at 60 frames per second in the future, as this is a very nice addition that is somewhat overlooked. The performance combined with its HD coat of paint make this entry's beautiful watercolor and pastel art direction pop and radiate throughout. The game didn't update its character models too greatly, retaining much of the charm that the original had, but some animations and facial expressions can be a bit jarring and drawn out to today's standards. However you may interpret it, it is definitely a relic of its time, charm and all, and while some may have wished for further updates to character models, I love its classic feel and really transports me to that pre-Breath of the Wild era of Zelda games. Hey everyone! Enjoying this deep dive of Zelda Skyward Sword? Do me a favor and strike that like button and subscribe to the channel for some more in-depth reviews of some of the biggest games in the industry. Thanks for your support, fellow FMLers! With about double the frame rate of its original release, Skyward Sword HD also has numerous other additions to the game which serve more as quality of life updates that make the experience a bit better. The biggest reason for picking up this release on the Switch is to be able to play the game with buttons, meaning you don't have to play it with motion controls. Because you can play this remaster with buttons, owners of the Switch Lite can enjoy this game, and players on the go can also enjoy this in handheld mode. Although this game was playable only in motion controls on the Wii, Nintendo has done an admirable job at translating the motion-like qualities of the game, namely in Link's sword slashes, quite well using the analog sticks and traditional buttons. In the original Wii version of Skyward Sword, players needed to physically swing their Wii remote in the direction that they wanted their attacks to land, whereas, in the Switch version, while playing with a controller without motion controls enabled, players must simply flick the right analog stick in the direction that they want their sword attacks to go. This is as good an approach to mapping Link's sword strikes as it gets, without completely reworking the mechanics to the game. To compensate for the camera controls, which traditionally are mapped to the right analog stick, players must hold the L button while also using the right stick to maneuver the camera. I also found this to be an appropriate way to engage the camera, but naturally found myself accidentally flailing my sword around like an idiot. It takes a little while to get used to, but eventually your muscle memory kicks in and you will be well on your way to adapt to the new control scheme. Everything else is as you would expect when it comes to controls with this game while playing without the motion controls. In case players need assistance with controls, players can hit the plus button to quickly access the controls and learn how various tools operate. This is a necessary feature because Skyward Sword has a lot of unique tools that function quite differently from one another, and the controls may not immediately come naturally for some. I know some Zelda fans are not going to be very pleased with how Nintendo reworked the controls, and it would be nice to be able to give players the choice to assign inputs to customize their play experience. In all, the developers did a solid job making this game playable using a traditional controller. That being said, I chose to forego the new control scheme and chose to switch from my Pro Controller to playing Skyward Sword HD with my Joy-Cons. For me, this was and still is the intended way to play this unique game, and my enjoyment with the game was a bit stronger once I shifted to purely motion controls. I felt like the Joy-Cons did a great job with accurately tracking my movements, and I mainly used motion controls because I liked using the analog stick to operate the camera instead of holding down the L button with the remapped controls. At the end of the day, it all comes down to personal preference, and it is great that you can switch between motion controls and the new standard controls with ease. Let me know in the comments how you like to play Skyward Sword HD and if you find the new control scheme to be enjoyable. Although playing Skyward Sword without motion controls is arguably the game's biggest update, players will be pleased to see that this HD remaster scores a variety of enhancements that, on their own, really improve upon their original release on the Wii. One of the biggest headaches players had with Skyward Sword was how overbearing Fi was with her help and guidance. Fi is a character that travels with Link to provide assistance from the very early hours of the game. She was also infamous for stopping Link in his tracks in numerous occasions. Although Fi still appears during key story moments, her actual interruptions to the gameplay have been greatly reduced to keep from breaking immersion and pace. Players can choose to engage with Fi on their own by pressing the down button and choosing between a variety of options, from hints on how to progress a puzzle to explaining some of the current events in the story. Additionally, players will know if Fi has additional information to share by taking notice of Link's sword. If the sword is emitting a glow, you will know that Fi is available to disclose further information in regards to hints and other useful info. Players will also be thrilled to see that whenever Link obtains certain collectibles, whether it be different colored rupees, bugs, or other useful items, that these notifications will not repeat themselves each time you reboot the game. Players can choose to highlight the items that they have found in their adventures in their inventory screen, with each item presenting a unique item description. Text can also be sped up by pressing the B button, so fast readers don't have to wait for the text to end before progressing. For players who wish to skip cutscenes, you are given the option to forego many of the story cutscenes to get right into the gameplay by hitting the minus button. This is especially nice for players who have already played through Skyward Sword on the Wii. Another minor but nice change includes the appearance of characters' names that appear in the dialogue boxes, indicating who is speaking. To round off the list of features is one that has taken over the Zelda community in frustration, and that is the amiibo compatibility. Players who manage to buy the Loftwing amiibo are given the benefit of being able to travel to the sky and back to that exact same spot on the surface from where they used the amiibo. This comes in handy when players find themselves quite far away from a bird statue and can easily restock on additional items, potions, and other gear that will give players a leg up on their travels. Because some bird statues can be spaced quite far away from one another in certain areas, this is a quick and convenient method players can use to stock up on supplies without losing progress on their adventure when they return below the clouds. Players wanting to buy the amiibo are finding it exceedingly rare to find one at retail and online, as they have been sold out for weeks and scalpers are putting them up for sale at much higher prices. I understand the frustration many people are having with this, as it is very unfortunate, but for myself who doesn't collect amiibos, it would be nice to see Nintendo make this feature available for everyone who owns the game. As mentioned earlier, some bird statues can be located pretty far from one another, and this new feature exclusive to the HD remaster would have been great to all those who paid the price of a full game to access this feature right from the start. That being said, this HD remaster still offers more in the way of features than any of the other two previous 3D Zelda remasters. Skyward Sword has always had its adoring fans and its staunch critics, and this remaster may not do much for those who were put off by it the first time around. But for those who are interested in checking out more of a traditional Zelda title before it went fully open world with Breath of the Wild, there is plenty to love about this game. The art style is oozing with color and life. NPCs and enemies all radiate with character, and the setting is incredibly unique for a Zelda title. For those who were turned off by the motion controls, Nintendo has listened and implemented solid button controls to compensate for the lack of motion. In addition, the game now runs at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second and has thrown in a variety of quality of life improvements that make this game a lot more approachable and enjoyable, both to veterans of Zelda, players who finished Skyward Sword on the Wii, and for players who haven't yet played the game. As a game that is retailing for $60, this remaster is worth the price with the new updates to the game. It is a lengthy adventure full of great moments with some of the best boss battles in the series, a great setting, and a lot of style. Now that motion controls are optional, a whole new audience of people may now be able to experience this unique 3D Zelda title. It is because of these improvements alone that I give The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword a recommended buy.